The passage of the state budget means school districts do know each how much they will be getting for next year. That's a key factor, as you know, as they prepare to send budgets to the voters later in the spring, within a matter of weeks, really. And districts will be getting more money. How that breaks down, we will discuss. The final agreement increased overall education spending by $1 billion, including $700 million in increased foundation aid. That was a big sticking point during negotiations, as was the breakdown for charter schools. Here to talk more about what it all means for districts is Michael Borges of the State Association of School Business Officials. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so you guys, not unusual, were a sticking point toward the end. Education, frequently a big flashpoint in the budget negotiations, but we had been saying throughout sort of the start of the budget talks, like, oh, this is sort of a ho-hum budget when it comes to education, and in the end, at the end of the day, it was not.
Right. Very surprising that being on the show before, we had talked about how really it was an uncontroversial year for the most part for education, and that the only thing that was really a sticking point at the time was the governor's decoupling of the foundation aid phase-in from school aid, and that got addressed, thankfully, in the final budget. So we kept the phase-in of the foundation aid.
But for how long?
Well, you know, I think this is a year-by-year kind of thing. You know, you never know what the governor's going to propose next year, so you know, we'll keep our fingers crossed. But I think overall it was sort of a mixed bag for public education. I think that the $1.1 billion increase, it's a 4.4 overall percentage increase. It's been the smallest since 2012. So the last 2 years it was around 6%, and then the year before that was 5%. So you know, it's a modest increase, but is it sufficient? That remains to be seen.
Well, interestingly, though, what did create the sticking point at the end was about the unfreezing of charter aid, effectively.
Right.
Did we not know that that was coming down the pike? I mean, that seemed to take people by surprise.
Well, no. I mean, charter aid was frozen in 2009, and so at some point, I think it was supposed to be maybe this year that it was supposed to become unfrozen, and I think that
well, it would have been $1,500 per pupil,
which
is a big
was like
number.
a $200 million hit, I think, statewide. So yeah, I think they reached a compromise. I think charter schools came out pretty well in the final budget.
But didn't we know, is what I'm saying? It seemed to take everybody aback.
Well, I think that everybody was focused on other things that were related to, like I said, the foundation aid phase, and that for us, for public education, that was the main sticking point.
Well, but for public education, I mean, let's be clear. This is all about public education. Traditional public schools versus charter schools, which are publicly funded.
Correct.
And then you have districts that complain, well, we lose aid because the money goes with the kid, more or less, right?
More or less, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so what they got in this budget was, they kept the cap on charter schools, although there's only 267 operating charter schools, and the cap I think is at 460.
Well, that's more of an issue in New York City than it is here.
Right. So I mean, like 90% of those charter schools are in New York City. But so even though they didn't raise the cap, it was sort of a mixed bag because they still haven't reached the cap. So I don't think charter schools lost out on that. In terms of the unfreezing tuition, again, it would have been a $1,500 increase if they had completely unfroze the charter school tuition. What they got was a $500 increase in the tuition rate, and then $500 more in supplemental aid, which is aid. School districts have to pay them, but is reimbursed by the state of New York. So they're getting an extra $1,000 this year, or in the 2017.
That's nothing to sneeze at.
Nothing to sneeze at, right? So,
but it doesn't all come from the districts themselves.
Well, the first $500
does, yes,
and
but
then the second
less than $1,500, right?
Well, true, but I mean, it's for them. I think it's a big win.
So interestingly, though, I mean, in terms of the runs, right? We didn't see the runs. It was a little bit back to the bad old days. I did talk to Tim Creamer and Bob Lowry about that, sort of at the height of the unknowing period that we had. And did you hear from your members? Because there were a lot of new people in the mix who had never experienced this before. It's been quite some time.
Very much so, yes. I mean, actually, I was just we were touring around the state visiting our regional chapters, and we had done a survey of our members, and it's like 25% of my members are retiring in the next 4 years.
Wow.
40% in the next 10. So yes, there's been turnover. There's going to be even more turnover, as the baby boom ages out. But yeah, so we got a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. What's going on? What runs do we use? Do we use the executive runs? Do we use last year's numbers?
Well, that's what the governor told everybody.
And that's what everybody.
Do.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say 90% of our folks decided to use the executive runs. Some will adjust their budgets because They have until April 21st. The boards have until April 21st to adopt their budgets and then submit to the voters on May 16th. So they have some time over the next couple of weeks if they want to include the additional $200 million in foundation aid that was included in the final runs. Overall, again, a mixed bag, modest increase.
So you're not
welcome.
expecting like a rush on the attempt to override the 2% property
No,
tax cap,
I
which is
think-
not 2%, but
Yes, I mean, I think at one point there were 18 school districts seeking to override, and I think that number will drop as they know what their final aid is going to be now. So you could see a decrease in the number of overrides from that. And again, 18 was very modest compared to the previous year as well, so it was a huge drop. From
right. Well, it's actually been fairly modest, just generally speaking.
Well, last year you saw a spike because the tax cap was
Yep.
0.12, with
Yep.
this year with being 1.26. And that's on the plus side. Though you got a modest increase in school aid, you did see the tax cap increase, and with inflation and then the Federal Reserve talking about further interest rate increases, you might see a higher tax cap next
There
year.
is still a consolidation piece
Yes.
in this budget,
But that was
which
for counties, I believe.
right,
Yeah.
but it does not bode well, I guess I should say. It's in keeping with an ideology, and we've discussed this before, that the governor has been espousing since he was state attorney general.
Yeah.
He really does feel, and there are people in the school district community who feel like he thinks that there are too many districts and he'd like to see consolidation, too many governments. Clearly, he said
Right.
that in the past. So are you concerned that the legislature took a step in this direction, not necessarily impacting you in the near term?
Yeah, well, in the budget, there was the continuation of star rebate checks. So for those communities, school districts, local governments that stay within their tax caps, property owners are going to be getting another rebate check for that. So, whether consolidations happen, there hasn't been a consolidation in I think 3 years. I think the Mohawk, Ilion school districts out in the Mohawk Valley was the last one. And that was just out in Corning, New York, actually, one of my local chapter meetings, where there's a lot of school districts under 1,500 students. And that's really where there could be some savings among school districts in
But
terms
people
of.
like their schools.
Well, that's the thing. They were actually talking more about merger of school sports because they didn't have enough students to field the whole football team
sure,
or a
yeah.
soccer team or whatever team there was, and it made more sense to merge two school districts' sporting teams. So then you have a merger of mascots
yeah.
and a merger
and
of
that could be
sporting
the first
teams.
step.
And
towards-
that could be
'cause it's
exactly right.
The
yeah.
team is where people really sort of have
Because we
their
looked at,
passion.
we did a merger report, and really mergers of school districts more than 1,500 students just doesn't make any economic sense.
I do want to ask before we run out of time,
Yeah.
what are you looking forward to in terms of the session? Not looking forward to like, yeah, I can't wait. Looking forward in time.
Well, I am looking forward to the end of the session.
Right, I think most people are. It's been a difficult session thus far, but do you have remaining issues that are hanging out there?
One of the disappointing parts, I think, in the budget was, other than workers' comp changes, which does benefit both private and public sectors, employers, there was really no mandate relief targeted specifically towards school districts. So in the Senate's one House budget version, there was some mandate relief suggestions that we had recommended. We still have those legislation pending, so we're going to be moving on those as well. The Assembly thankfully had something in there about making the changes to the tax cap that were approved, 2 years ago, about dealing with BOCES capital exclusions and pilots. Unfortunately, again, that never made it into a final budget. So we're going to be looking at seeing if we can still deal with those tax cap changes. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking for: mandate relief, some school efficiencies, and the tax cap issues.
Interesting. Well, just to be clear, when you talk about mandate relief, the big kahuna of mandates really is Medicaid funding.
Right.
And that was part and parcel of a discussion that we had regarding the federal healthcare reform bill that didn't go anywhere, and the governor really went to war on that. So I'm not so
We're
sure.
actually going to lose a lot of money. I mean, school
right.
districts, we get about $88 million outside of New York City. If you include New York City, it's like around 125. So
Yeah.
school districts have a lot to lose if changes at the federal level impact how Medicaid is distributed.
Well, to be continued then. Take a break
Yep.
and regroup. We'll be back, and we will speak to you again. Michael Borges, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.